Have you ever wondered what would have happened if Voldemort won? Just for today, let's step into a dystopian future where Voldemort emerged triumphant, shattering the hopes of Harry Potter and the wizarding community. What would Voldemort's reign of darkness look like? What fates would have awaited our beloved characters in a world under the Dark Lord's rule? How would Hogwarts, once a beacon of magic and hope, have transformed under his tyranny? And how would the dominance of the dark forces have impacted the relationship between the magical and Muggle worlds? Today we're going to be discussing all of that and more as we peel back the folds of a world where Voldemort reigns triumphant. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Today we're going to be discussing the implications of Voldemort's success over Harry Potter in the Deathly Hallows. The duel between Voldemort and Harry at the end of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, deemed Voldemort's last stand, is a climactic moment in the series, marking the final confrontation between good versus evil. Driven by his obsession with power and the desire to vanquish Harry once and for all, Voldemort engages in a fierce magical duel. However, his arrogance and disregard for the power of love and unity ultimately lead to his downfall, and it's this last stand that marks the end of Voldemort's reign of terror, resulting in a restoration of peace to the wizarding world. But had just a few minor details been changed prior to Harry's final encounter with Voldemort, it all could have gone a lot differently. For example, if Voldemort had simply used his own wand, and not the Elder Wand, which had allegiance to Harry, things could have quickly gone south for Harry. At the end of the day, Voldemort was a far more powerful wizard. Yes, for a time, Harry was tethered to life due to the fact that Voldemort had used Harry's blood to regenerate his body, but Voldemort didn't need to kill Harry, he just needed to incapacitate him. Who is to say that Voldemort couldn't have just chopped off Harry's arms and legs and thrown him in a cell? Dark, I know. And without Harry there to thwart Voldemort, I think he could have easily taken control over the good guys. Dumbledore was gone, and Voldemort was leaps and bounds more powerful than any other wizard. I truly don't think that anyone would have been able to stop him. And if Voldemort's last stand ended up being Harry's last stand, what would have happened to the wizarding world? One important thing to note before we get started is that this video will not consider the events of the Cursed Child. I'm sure many of you will appreciate that. Anyway, let's dive in. When the dust settled. With Harry Potter finally out of the way, Voldemort would have had free reign on what he wanted to do next. The Great Hall, which once served as a symbol of unity and learning, would now be a scene of devastation. The air would be thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the lingering echoes of spells and curses. Debris would litter the floor, remnants of shattered pillars and broken windows, testament to the ferocity of the battle that just transpired. The once vibrant and bustling castle grounds would now be eerily silent, save for the occasional groan of the wounded and the mournful cries of those who have lost loved ones. Dark clouds would shroud the sky, casting a pall of gloom over the once majestic Hogwarts castle. The bodies of fallen witches and wizards, both young and old, would lie scattered across the grounds, their faces frozen in expressions of fear and defiance. And the victorious Death Eaters, clad in dark robes and bearing the mark of their master, would patrol the grounds with a sense of triumphant menace. Their dark laughter would mingle with the anguished cries of the defeated, serving as a grim reminder of the price of resistance. The survivors would huddle together in the shadows, their spirits broken and their hopes dashed, and their future would seem bleak and uncertain as they grappled with the harsh reality of life under the rule of the Dark Lord. At this point, I suspect that Voldemort would offer the remaining survivors a chance, join him or die. Of course, he knew that this collection of witches and wizards opposed him, but in a world without Harry Potter, Voldemort knew that he could rule with an iron fist. From there, I suspect that he would have ruled out those who knew about or had any involvement with his Horcruxes. That is, I don't think Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, or the insolent Neville would have survived very long after Harry was dealt with. With that said, I don't think that Voldemort would have killed everyone close to Harry. Given his sadistic nature, I suspect that he would have wanted Harry's loved ones to suffer in this new, dark reality. One Hogwarts house. After the dust had settled and Voldemort had dealt with the appropriate members of the opposition, I suspect that he would have rallied the remaining survivors into the Great Hall and made a grand announcement that Hogwarts would only offer one house moving forward: Slytherin. The abolition of Hogwarts houses under Voldemort's reign would signify a significant departure from the traditional values and principles upon which Hogwarts was founded. Slytherin House, known for its emphasis on ambition, cunning, and pure-blood supremacy, would become the sole remaining institution within the school. The other houses, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff, would be eradicated, their banners torn down, and their common rooms left deserted. The decision to abolish the house system would act as a symbolic gesture of Voldemort's desire to homogenize the student body and impose his ideology of pure-blood superiority. By eliminating the diversity represented by the different houses, Voldemort would create a unified front of like-minded individuals who adhere to his twisted beliefs. Slytherin House, with its history of producing dark wizards and witches, would become the exclusive breeding ground for Voldemort's followers, fostering a culture of elitism and prejudice that would continue for many years to come. Furthermore, the once vibrant inter-house rivalry that defined life at Hogwarts would be replaced by a culture of fear and oppression. Students would no longer be sorted into houses based on their individual qualities and virtues, but rather their blood status and allegiance to Voldemort's regime. Any deviation from the prescribed norms of pure blood supremacy would be met with harsh punishment, reinforcing the atmosphere of fear and conformity that permeates the school. Hogwarts, once a symbol of unity and diversity, would become a bastion of darkness and tyranny under Voldemort's rule, where only those who pledge loyalty to the Dark Lord are deemed worthy of recognition and respect. Oh, and the only students worthy of studying at Hogwarts? Purebloods. This would serve as a sign of respect to Voldemort's ancestor, Salazar Slytherin, whose ultimate goal was to rid Hogwarts of anyone that didn't come from a pure bloodline. Ministry of Magic. With Harry defeated, any remaining resistance within the Ministry of Magic would be swiftly crushed. Those who opposed Voldemort's regime would be rounded up and either imprisoned, subjected to the Imperius Curse, or eliminated outright. The Aurors, once the frontline defenders of wizarding law, would now serve as enforcers of Voldemort's will, hunting down dissenters and enforcing his draconian laws. After purging those deemed disloyal, he would replace key positions of authority with his most loyal Death Eaters, ensuring that every department and office is under his control. The Ministry would become a puppet government, existing solely to enforce Voldemort's rule and suppress any opposition. And with the Ministry firmly under his control, Voldemort would waste no time in enacting a series of dark and oppressive laws designed to solidify his grip on power. These laws would include measures to discriminate against Muggle-born witches and wizards, restrict freedom of speech and assembly, and expand the authority of the Ministry to spy on and monitor its citizens. Furthermore, Voldemort's obsession with blood purity would lead to the implementation of policies aimed at purging the wizarding world of impure bloodlines. Muggle-borns would be targeted for persecution, their wands confiscated, and their magical abilities suppressed. From there, they would be tossed into work camps. These camps would serve as tools of oppression and control, designed to punish and marginalize those deemed unworthy by Voldemort's twisted standards of blood purity. Non-pureblood witches and wizards, particularly Muggle-borns, would be rounded up and forcibly segregated from the rest of magical society. They would be stripped of their wands and subjected to degrading treatment, forced to perform menial labor under harsh and inhumane conditions. The purpose of these work camps would be twofold: to punish those deemed impure by Voldemort's regime, and to serve as a deterrent to others who might dare to defy his authority. The mere existence of these camps would instill fear and compliance among the general population, casting a dark shadow over the once wondrous wizarding world. Under Voldemort's rule, censorship of information would be rampant, with any dissenting voices silenced and inconvenient truths buried beneath a veil of propaganda and lies. The Daily Prophet would become a mouthpiece for Voldemort's regime, spreading misinformation and propaganda to justify his actions and demonize his enemies. Blood purity. Let's address the elephant in the room here. If Voldemort were to persecute all of the half-bloods and Muggle-borns, how many witches and wizards would actually be left over? The truth is that in the wizarding world, the vast majority of the population is comprised of Muggle-borns and half-bloods, and the loss of these groups would leave a significant void. The scarcity of purebloods in wizarding society is of course the result of intermarriage with Muggles and Muggle-borns over generations, leading to a dilution of pure magical ancestry. As populations grew and urbanization increased, opportunities for social mixing expanded, making it challenging for pureblood families to maintain their lineage. Furthermore, changing social attitudes towards blood purity, coupled with declines in family lineages and external influences, have further contributed to the dwindling numbers of purebloods. Consequently, purebloods have become increasingly rare within the wizarding world, with their once dominant position gradually diminishing over time. In fact, the pureblood population became so scarce over the years that a directory was created to keep track of those little few who remained. This pureblood directory was named the Sacred 28. This extremely prejudiced list was released in the first half of the 20th century, sometime in the early 30s. Although the author of the publication remained anonymous, it was widely rumored to have been penned by cantankerous Nott, with the Nott family, of course, making the list. Not only did the Sacred 28 encourage the discrimination of Muggles, it also spread propaganda, re. the muddying of blood, suggesting that any bloodlines that had gotten mixed up with Muggles had muddied their blood. Therefore, Voldemort's goal would be to replenish the pureblood population, eventually resorting to extreme measures such as selective breeding and eugenics. I expect that he'd first promote social segregation between purebloods and non-purebloods, ensuring that interactions between the two groups were minimal. Pureblood families would be encouraged to associate exclusively with others of their kind, while non-purebloods would face isolation and ostracization from wizarding society. Next, he would encourage pureblood families to marry within their own ranks to ensure the purity of their lineage, while non-purebloods would be discouraged or prohibited from reproducing. Lastly, I suspect that Voldemort would resort to tactics like selective breeding, a true testament to the insidious nature of Voldemort's regime and the depths of oppression and control to which he was willing to go in his pursuit of a homogeneous, pure-blooded wizarding society. What's important to note here, however, is that if pureblood individuals were encouraged or mandated to marry within a limited pool of other purebloods, there would be a reduced genetic diversity within the population. Over time, this could result in an increased prevalence of genetic disorders and health problems associated with inbreeding. And given how small the pureblood population is to begin with, there wouldn't be much genetic variation to mitigate the effects of inbreeding. World takeover. I think it goes without saying that if Voldemort were to gain control of the wizarding world, that the International Statute of Secrecy would be completely out the window. The International Statute of Secrecy serves as the cornerstone of maintaining the divide between the Muggle and magical worlds. Enacted in 1692, this magical law stipulates that the existence of witches, wizards, and magical creatures must be kept hidden from the non-magical population. The statute was established in response to the escalating tensions and persecution faced by magical beings during the witch hunts and Inquisition. Its primary purpose is to safeguard the secrecy and safety of the wizarding community by preventing Muggles from discovering the existence of magic. So why would Voldemort, who A. wanted to enslave Muggles, and B. breached the Statute of Secrecy on a number of occasions, show any sort of respect to this statute? I suspect that after firmly establishing his control over the wizarding world, Voldemort's insatiable lust for power and domination would lead him to set his sights on conquering the Muggle world as well. Despite his initial focus on magical supremacy, Voldemort's ambition knows no bounds, and he may view the Muggle world as a realm ripe for conquest. However, unlike his predecessor, Grindelwald, who sought to openly engage with Muggles, Voldemort's approach would likely be more clandestine and strategic. He would harness the resources and technologies of the wizarding world to infiltrate and manipulate the political and economic structures of the Muggle world from behind the scenes, orchestrating events to sow chaos and discord. Voldemort's ultimate goal would be to subjugate the Muggle population under his tyrannical rule, further expanding his influence and cementing his legacy as the ultimate ruler of both magical and non-magical realms. However, I also think that this is where Voldemort's Achilles' heel would reveal itself. You see, Voldemort had a history of arrogance and overconfidence. High on his defeat of Harry Potter and fresh conquest over the wizarding world, I suspect that Voldemort would entirely underestimate his enemy. While at first Voldemort's magical tactics would cause chaos amidst the Muggle population, I suspect that after some time they would adapt to it. And while in a scenario where both populations were equal in size, magic would likely prevail, Voldemort simply didn't have the numbers to gain proper traction in the Muggle world. Furthermore, by focusing all of his energy on the takeover of the Muggle world, Voldemort would leave himself vulnerable to attacks from rebel witches and wizards, outcasts in the wizarding world that went into hiding the moment Voldemort asserted himself as the world's ruler. After finding himself slowly losing control of the wizarding world and fighting a losing battle in the Muggle world, Voldemort would become even more desperate for power. This, in turn, would cause Voldemort to turn to the wizarding world's premier magical institution for help. His plan was simple: build an army of Hogwarts students. Faced with the possibility of losing control over the wizarding world due to his focus on the Muggle conflict, Voldemort would turn to Hogwarts students as his last resort to gain control over both realms. He would see Hogwarts as a crucial asset in his quest for domination, and he would view the students not only as potential soldiers, but also as a means to bolster his dwindling ranks and instill fear and loyalty among the younger generation. Utilizing his influence over the Ministry of Magic, Voldemort would implement mandatory military training and indoctrination programs at Hogwarts, molding the impressionable minds of the students into obedient soldiers of his cause. However, as Voldemort's attention becomes increasingly fixated on the Muggle conflict, dissent would brew within the wizarding world. Some pureblood families, disillusioned by Voldemort's tyranny and fearful of the repercussions of a full-scale war with the Muggles, would begin to question their allegiance to the Dark Lord. Resistance movements, comprised of both purebloods and non-purebloods, operating separately of course, would begin to organize and plot to overthrow Voldemort's regime. And amidst this turmoil, Hogwarts would become a battleground for ideological warfare. Students would be torn between loyalty to Voldemort and their own moral compasses. Some fervently embrace Voldemort's rhetoric, eagerly joining his ranks and pledging their allegiance to his cause, and others would secretly resist, forming underground alliances and covertly working to undermine Voldemort's authority. Voldemort's grip on the wizarding world would weaken as the resistance gains momentum, and he would realize that his plans to use Hogwarts students as a last resort may have, to some extent, backfired, further fracturing his already tenuous hold on power. Under these circumstances, a normal leader would recognize that he was fighting a losing battle, but Voldemort, ever arrogant, would double down, instead unleashing an onslaught of vicious attacks on the Muggles with his newly built army. These attacks, however, would be met with severe consequences. His inconsequential numbers would inevitably fall to the Muggle defense. The sheer scale and sophistication of Muggle military technology and tactics would prove to be formidable obstacles for Voldemort's magical army, and despite their magical prowess, Voldemort's followers would find themselves entirely ill-equipped to contend with the advanced weaponry and strategic capabilities of the Muggle forces. And with his numbers brought to an all-time low, Voldemort would return to the wizarding world with his tail between his legs, war-torn and accompanied by just a small fraction of the army with which he'd embarked on his conquest. The Welcome Party. Upon his return, Voldemort would be met with widespread discontent and defiance from within the wizarding community. The resistance movements that had been simmering in his absence would rise up with renewed vigor, emboldened by the Muggle world's successful defense against his forces. And at this point, wizards and witches from all walks of life would join together to ensure that Voldemort was ousted from his position of power. His failed military operations and sense of delusion would instill a complete lack of confidence in the magical population, and they would in turn recognize that it was time for a new leader. And as Voldemort attempts to reassert his control over the wizarding world, he would find himself facing fierce opposition at every turn. The once loyal Death Eaters would begin to defect, disillusioned by their leader's failures and the suffering he's brought upon the magical community. Meanwhile, underground networks of resistance fighters would work tirelessly to undermine Voldemort's authority, sabotaging his operations and spreading dissent among the populace. Realizing that his grip on power is slipping, Voldemort would resort to increasingly desperate and ruthless measures to maintain control. He would unleash waves of terror and violence upon those who dare to oppose him, indiscriminately targeting people and orchestrating brutal crackdowns on dissent. However, these tactics would only serve to further galvanize the resistance and strengthen their resolve to overthrow him. And as the tide of resistance swells, Voldemort would find himself isolated and cornered, with nowhere left to turn. His once mighty empire would crumble around him as his followers desert him and his enemies close in from all sides. In a final, desperate bid to cling to power, Voldemort would unleash all the dark magic at his disposal. But it would ultimately be in vain. He had lost. In the end, Voldemort's reign of terror would come to an ignominious end as he is cast down from his throne of power, leaving behind a legacy of fear and suffering that will never be forgotten. However, Voldemort's defeat did not herald an era of peace. Rather, it ushered in a new chapter of turmoil for the wizarding world. A new enemy. By breaking down the divide between the Muggle and magical worlds and waging war on the Muggles, Voldemort had irreversibly altered the course of history. The International Statute of Secrecy, which had functioned successfully for centuries, would be in shambles, exposing the wizarding community to the scrutiny and hostility of the Muggle world. And while Voldemort's downfall may have brought relief to many within the wizarding world, the aftermath of his defeat would leave them embroiled in a conflict with the Muggle population, fighting a new war. The Muggles would, quite understandably, center their crosshairs on the magical world, and this would usher in a new era of violence. The scars of war run deep, and the wizarding world would now have to reckon with the consequences of Voldemort's actions as they seek to rebuild and forge a new path forward. And if you want to know what happens next, let me know in the comments. What do you think would happen in a world where Voldemort reigns victorious? Which of my points do you agree with, disagree with? Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live